Well, welcome. How are things going so far? I hope so far this course is going well and these videos that you found them to be useful. Today we're going to be looking at number lines and the Cartesian coordinates. Now let's start with the number line. Now a number line is something that we could use to plot any numbers, and you're familiar with using this for common numbers like, plotting maybe a 1 or 1.5, but we could have other fractions like 3/4 would go on a number line, so 3/4 we could place that on a number line. Square root of 12, we could find the decimal approximation for that, and that's going to be between 3 and 4. But sometimes we're going to see things like this, where we're going to have to decipher from a sentence what values we're going to be using on the number line. So this is saying find all odd numbers between -3 and 4. Now there's a couple of key words there, the first of which is odd. Okay, so odd numbers would be like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and so on. Or it could be the negative of those values, -1, -3, -5, and so on in the negative direction. Then we also have this word between. That word between is really, really important. Let's think about something for a second. Let's say if you're walking along and you meet some friends and they're sitting at a bench. And you're going to sit between your friends. Now if you're socially normal, you're going to sit between them, right? You're going to just sit right between your friends and have a conversation. Now, it'd be a little weird if you sat between your friends and all of a sudden just sprawled out and laid down on their laps. Okay, that'd be a little strange. So if you're going to go sit between your friends, you're going to do just that. You're going to sit between them. How does this connect with between -3 and 4? Well, when we say between two things, we're not including those items, whether they were friends, or in this case, the numbers -3 and 4. So I know 4 is not an odd number, but -3 is an odd number. But since it says that it's going to be between -3 and 4, and that's it, we would not include -3 as one of those odd numbers. So when we look at our number line, we would plot -1, 1, and 3. That's it. So those are the only odd numbers between -3 and 4. Let's look at another example. This one's worded a little different. This one says find all numbers, not just the odd numbers, find all numbers between -3 and 4, but it also follows that by saying we're going to include the endpoints, -3 and 4. Now when we're working with the number line, we're going to use different kinds of circles. Sometimes it's going to be a closed circle, sometimes it's going to be an open circle. Well, what do those mean? Well, we use a closed circle when the endpoint is included. We use an open circle when the endpoint is not going to be included. So in this situation, the way we would graph this is we are going to include the -3 and 4. So we'd put a closed circle at -3, and we'd put another closed circle at +4. And then we're including every single number between them. Not just the odd numbers, not just the integers, every decimal, every single number between -3 and 4. So we connect that with a line. So that's how we could graphically represent the numbers between -3 and 4, including those two endpoints. Let's look at another example. This time it says find all numbers greater than -1. Now sometimes we can say it in words like that, and we could also use a symbol. You might remember your inequalities. Remember those inequalities, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Well, in this situation, we're saying that all the numbers, x, we could say, are going to be greater than -1. So that in this situation, it means -1 is not included, but all the numbers bigger than -1 would be. Now, some people want to say, well, could I just put a closed circle then at 0? No, because -0.99999 would be included, but -1 will not. So the way we're going to graph this one is we're going to put an open circle at -1, meaning -1's not included, but everything else to the right of it is. So we would have an arrow going to the right of that open circle. So that's how you'd graph that on a number line. What about this one? If we have all numbers less than 4. I want you to try this one on your own. So I want you to think about the way this one's phrased. Now, we could also represent this one with an inequality, saying x is less than 4. So I want you to take a second, just simply draw a quick little simple number line on your note sheet, and I want you to graph x is less than 4. Okay, let's see how you did. So it's less than 4, so 4 is not included, so you should have an open circle at 4. It's everything less than, everything smaller than 4, so we'd have an arrow going to the left of 4. Okay, let's look at another example. This time, let's say if it says this symbol. Remember what that symbol means? So this symbol means that all numbers less than or equal to 4. So when I go to graph this one, I'm going to put a closed circle at 4, because this time 4 is included as part of the values, and then we would have an arrow pointing to the left. Okay, so that's the difference between these last two examples. So that's how we would graph values on a number line. Now let's talk about the Cartesian coordinate system. Let's talk a little history here. History is a beautiful thing, right? And we all love history. History is a wonderful thing. So sometimes it's good to understand where some of this comes from. This comes from a guy by the name of René Descartes. And he lived about 400 years ago, and he is the one who's associated with coming up with the Cartesian system of numbers and graphing numbers. Pretty smart guy. Could have worked on that mullet or whatever was going on there, but we won't hold that against him. All right, well, what is a Cartesian system? So we've already talked about a number line. Okay, so a number line, the way we're familiar with it, runs horizontally. Now there are number lines that run vertically. If you think about like a thermometer, if you look at a thermometer outside, those are going to go vertically. And so we could have, so when it's a horizontal number line, we call that your x-axis, and your vertical number line, we call that your y-axis. And we have some special points there. Now we call these, every coordinate, we call it an ordered pair. We call it an ordered pair because it goes in a certain order. Your x will always go first, your y comes second. Which is really easy because just think about alphabetically, x would come before y. Now the x value refers to, like I said, the x-axis, which is our horizontal distance. Our y value refers to our vertical distance. So we're going to use this to map each point onto the graph. Now, this coordinate system, this Cartesian coordinate system, is broken up into quadrants. The first quadrant is where both the x and y's are going to be positive. That's where a lot of your work in math ends up. When we're doing story problems, and we're going to graph story problems later on, we'll be working with quadrant 1 a lot. But now, math teachers are kind of backwards. You'd think that we'd want to go in a clockwise direction. But that's not the way we decided to do it. And actually there's a connection that later you're going to learn about in trigonometry. So the reason why we order the quadrants the way that we do is because of trigonometry. And that's this direction. So it's going to go quadrant 1 and then quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. And we use Roman numerals to represent those different quadrants. So you want to be familiar with that because sometimes we'll reference a particular quadrant and you'll want to know what we're talking about. Now we have a special coordinate, 0, 0. That is what we call the origin. Okay, when you think about it, that's where all of our points are going to start at. It's kind of like your home base. All right? What do I mean by that? Let's look at some graphing. Let's graph some particular coordinates. Let's say if we had to graph these coordinates. So the first coordinate is going to be -2, 3. So if we start at the origin, that -2 means we're going to go to the left. We're going to go to the left 2 units and then up 3 units, and that would be our point A. We want to go to point B. Again, we're going to start at 0, 0. We're going to start at the origin. We're going to go to the right 1 unit and up 2 units, and that would bring us to point B. Next, if we wanted to graph the coordinate -3, -1, we would go to the left 3 units and then down 1 unit to get to point C. And lastly, to graph D, we'd go to the right 2, and then we'd go down 2 to get to that last point. And that's it. That is a Cartesian coordinate system. A lot of this might be review for you. You've probably done some of this before, but if not, you should have taken good notes. So hopefully now this will help you this week as you work on your assignments. Good luck.